On a freezing winter day in 1947, the 12th of February to be precise, Paris was still living in its grey aftermath of the war, but there was one place that was bustling with excitement, and this was the Avenue Montaigne number 30, the studio of Christian Dior, who was just about to present his very first collection under his own name, and this collection would soon be known as the New Look, which would influence fashion until the 1960s. And part of this famous collection was a very special jacket or suit, the bar jacket or the bar suit, and I'm going to look into the details of this very famous creation. And before I start, I need to do the housekeeping. This is a non-sponsored video. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. At the time, on the 12th of February in 1947, fashion shows were a far cry from what we are used to now. Now there are these big events, you have all these celebrities, influencers. Sometimes it's more about the show than about the clothes, and this was completely different in 1947 when Christian Dior opened his house. It was a very intimate event, very exclusive, and the main purpose of these runway shows was to show the garments to potential buyers who could then order the garments. Of course, there were also friends and family, celebrities involved. On this February day in 1947, among the audience was Rita Hayworth or also Begum Aga Khan. So we had already the celebrity involvement, but it was very, very different from what it is today. And what the audience was going to see was very different to what they were used to, because since the 1920s, the female silhouette became straighter, easier. The corset was not always required anymore. Think about the flapper dresses that were really straight, but even throughout the 1930s and 40s, the silhouettes were much straighter than they would be in the 1950s or how they had been before. There was a practical reason because, first of all, during the war, a lot of women entered jobs because the men were at war. So they could not have impractical clothing like a big petticoat or something. That was just not feasible at the time. But there was also another practical reason. There was the economic downturn, the crisis, so everything was very expensive and not a lot of people had money to afford opulent clothing or clothing that needed a lot of fabric. And speaking of fabric, this was also rationed during the war. So naturally, we had a very different silhouette, a very different style. And then Christian Dior sends out the models at exactly 10:30. And I can only imagine probably a lot of people were holding their breath because it was completely different to what they were used to seeing. It was a completely new look, and this would also be the term shaping fashion over the next years. And the term new look actually refers to two silhouettes, the corolle and the en huit. The corolle actually refers to the corolla. It's an upside down turned carnation, so it's like a flower that opens up towards the floor. So we have this signature hourglass shape and then a very opulent skirt. The second one, the en huit, is also very feminine, but it has this shape, as the name suggests, like the number 8, and it also has a very accentuated waistline. And in this famous corolle silhouette, there's this one garment that most people associate with that collection, and this is the famous bar suit or bar jacket. It's a costume made of a jacket and a skirt. The jacket is made from silk, Shantung silk actually, which is silk that was first developed in the Chinese region of Shandong. And it's in this ivory color. It also features 5 buttons. It's actually very simple. And then also a very voluminous skirt in black is paired with it. And even though this suit looks quite simple at first sight, you already heard it, silk, Shantung silk was used, so this is not a cheap fabric. And then for this voluminous skirt, 13 meters of fabric were used, which was a lot, and we need to think about this. This was 1947 and fabric was still rationed. At first sight, this rather simple suit corresponds to the taste and style of the time because there is no unnecessary embellishment, for example, but if you look closely, you assess the material, how much is needed, you already see the opulence. The signature hourglass shape was achieved by padding, and Pierre Cardin was actually working for Christian Dior at the time. He was not known yet, and he was sent out to get the cotton padding to achieve this signature style of the jacket and to make it look even more feminine. And Pierre Cardin actually did more than just get the cotton padding. He is said to have contributed a lot or even created that signature style. And the name Bar Jacket relates to the Plaza Athénée Hotel because Christian Dior very often visited the bar at this hotel, so the name actually relates to that bar. And since Christian Dior sent this design on the runway, it has been copied a lot in all different price segments. It immediately started after the presentation of his runway shows, so soon it was not only accessible for the elites, for the people who could afford it, but at different price points, and this is also why it shaped fashion so much. But until today, this style has been copied a lot, and even Christian Dior himself involved this design, this garment, 22 times in his couture collections until he suddenly passed away in 1957. The term new look was actually not invented by Christian Dior himself. It's very unlikely that he anticipated the hype or that he even came up with this term. It was the international media and especially one former Vogue editor who then worked for Harper's Bazaar called Carmel Snow. And after the show, she wrote, "This changes everything." And then later on she said, and I'm going to quote, "It's quite a revolution, dear Christian. Your dresses have such a new look." And this silhouette or this style was going to conquer the 1950s. Basically, when we think of 1950s fashion, the signature silhouette that we think about is the new look by Christian Dior. And it is also linked to a kind of backwards development for women because, as I said before, in the 20s, 30s and 40s, fashion was more loose, I would say, especially during the war. Women went into the workforce because men were at war, so they had to become breadwinners, and it was just really impractical to wear a corset and a skirt with petticoats underneath the whole day when you're at work. So this was a necessary thing. And we also know that there were a lot of women who fought against the corset. Also, Gabrielle Chanel famously detested the corset, and now Christian Dior took it up and it's becoming fashionable again. And what happened in the 1950s with women, even though a lot of women had entered the workforce in the 1940s, men came back, and then suddenly also because of this positive economic development, it became a thing that women stayed at home again. We could even say it became a status symbol that the woman could stay at home. And this image that we still have from the 1950s is this perfect housewife staying at home, taking care of the family. She always looks immaculate. She has this beautiful hourglass figure and she wears these complicated and impractical clothes. So we can see the link here. Is this only the fault of Christian Dior? I'm not so sure about this. Maybe after the times of the 20s, 30s and 40s and also the rationing, maybe this was just something women wanted again. Maybe some women wanted to look more feminine again. I don't want to see it too negatively. And given what we know about Christian Dior, and also his relationship to his sister, I don't think that he did this to basically put a cage on women with the corset again. I think it was his kind of idealistic view. He wanted women to look beautiful, and at the time this was the beauty ideal. This was also how he saw women. So yes, we have this backwards development, but I'm not sure if we can entirely pin it on Christian Dior himself. And there's actually another piece to the puzzle, because I do think it may have been an overall development or a fashion trend in the making that then didn't materialize because of the war. There is a picture by Horst P. Horst. It's his last pictures when he was in Paris before he fled to America. And it shows a model from the back, and she wears a corset by Maison. And it's the signature corset, so we have this shape again. So maybe this was brewing underneath. Maybe people were already experimenting again with this look, because also this picture is said to have a reference to Edouard Manet's Nana. So this is then basically a reference of the late 19th century and also the fashion of the time. And Christian Dior was not the only one experimenting with the silhouette after the war. Quite a few designers actually did, but he ended up the most successful one, the one linked to the silhouette. And I would say, looking at this, it may have been something in the making. Why was it then so successful? And I think there's an element of nostalgia. I just said in my introduction, Paris was still grey. It was just after the war. there were a lot of issues just because the war was over. There was no food, a lot of homes were destroyed, a lot of people have died, and maybe people wanted to escape. Very often we use fashion to escape to something else, and in this case it would be the late 19th century. And one of my most favorite examples actually comes from the German-speaking countries. The CC movies about the Austrian Empress Elisabeth, which are also very famous in many other countries, are exactly this. It was a distraction from the grey everyday life. It was this hope after the war in the 1950s also, and it was kind of a glorification and nostalgia of the monarchy, even though not everything was great during the monarchy, but these movies gave you the feeling that these were the happier times, the better times, and maybe this was exactly something that was also taken up in the new look. So we have this reflection of history and also the development of the women's movement in this bar suit reflected, and irrespective of this, it is a very beautiful design. I'm just not sure if I could wear it the whole day, given that you have to wear a corset. I wouldn't want that, but it looks beautiful, and as I said before, Christian Dior took it up multiple times until he passed in 1957, when Yves Saint Laurent took over in 1958 for 2 years. He also worked with this bar suit, but he developed it further. He included a special silhouette called the trapeze, and you can already see this was the beginnings of what was going to happen in the 1960s. And this was then also taken up by his successor, Marc Bohan, who would be with the Maison until the late 1980s, because his bar suit in the 1960s reflects exactly what's going on in history and also for the women's movement. Because what was happening in the 1960s, women started to wear the miniskirt, loose cuts, and we can clearly see that also in the interpretation of the bar suit. Marc Bohan's silhouette in the 1960s is called the slimline. It's also reflected in the bar suit, and then we also have an example from the late 1980s where we clearly see the times, because it's the 80s, we can tell. It's the bar suit again, but the silhouette is a bit different. It's not as opulent in terms of the skirt, and also the hat is a bit smaller. So also the jacket looks different. So we see it is this original bar suit made for the 1980s. Gianfranco Ferré took over in 1989, and what does he stand for? He stands for exuberance, flamboyance, and also architectural shapes, and he also has a very interesting interpretation of the bar suit. And when we talk about exuberance and flamboyance, who comes to mind? Of course, John Galliano, who then became the creative director of Dior, and he then actually referenced the interpretation of Gianfranco Ferré of the bar suit. And I find this particularly interesting that in 2009 he not only took the original bar suit from 1947, but also this interpretation of one of his successors. And Galliano also took this bar suit up multiple times, but he kind of turned it into Galliano, I would say, because, for example, in 1997 for the Haute Couture Spring-Summer collection, he created the DIOR'S suit. I hope I said this correctly. It is basically, when you look at it now, especially, I see Galliano all over, because you have this mini skirt and then you have this hat. So he substituted the original hat with his own interpretation, and then when you look at the jacket, you see the jacket of the bar suit, the bar jacket. So then you have to kind of know what he is referencing. Another interesting example is from his Spring-Summer Couture collection for 2009, and in the same year for the Fall-Winter Couture collection he created a pink version of it, and to keep it YouTube friendly here, it was presented in this typical Galliano way, but I actually really liked it. So we have the exuberance of a Ferré, and also then even more with Galliano. And in relationships, we say that after one relationship, we pick somebody who is completely different for the next relationship. And we can even see this here with the creative director for Dior. We had this past with Galliano, and then comes Raf Simons, and his interpretations of the bar suit are much quieter, Some people say, of course, more wearable. I think they are very beautiful, but you definitely have to know what you are talking about, what we see here, that this is the bar suit, because you have to have some kind of knowledge when you see the silhouette. Nevertheless, I think it's beautiful interpretations. I think it's a personal taste thing here if you prefer the exuberance of a Galliano or more the quiet luxury, as we would call it today, even though I hate the term, of a Raf Simons. And also to put this in the context of the time, this was the early 2010s. And when we think about it, there was Phoebe Philo at Celine, there was Hedi Slimane at Yves Saint Laurent. There was a big movement towards simpler cuts and shapes or quieter clothing. So maybe this is also what this interpretation of the bar suit stands for. Since 2015, Maria Grazia Chiuri has been the creative director of the Maison, and also she has worked with the bar suit. I have to say there are a lot of discussions about how she works with the archive. Sometimes I find it too literal. I sometimes also find it a bit too commercial, but that's just my overall point of view. And sometimes I look at the haute couture and I'm like, is this really haute couture? But that's my personal opinion. Let me know what you think about it. So she worked with the bar suit, and for example, in 2017 for spring summer, she had it combined with a tulle skirt. For fall winter, there was a black and white version of the skirt. I'm not really a big fan of it. What is a bit more interesting was the collaboration in 2020 with Grace Wales Bonner. Again, you have to know that they are referencing the bar suit because it's very subtle. What I liked was the combination with the colorful skirt, so that's a plus. And I also browsed on the website, so you can still buy this bar jacket. They have it online at the moment. It's very subtle. It looks basically like a blazer with a bit of a thing on the side. So I'm not sure if I'm a big fan of this interpretation. Again, let me know. Maybe I'm too critical of Maria Grazia Chiuri. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this. And when we talk about interpretations by Maria Grazia Chiuri of the bar suit, I also want to mention last year's Cannes Film Festival, because there were actually two, let's say, reinterpretations on the red carpet. One was worn by the French singer-songwriter Iseult, and one was worn by the model Rhoda Mohammed. Let's start with Iseult's black and white look. Immediately when you look at it, you know it. Maybe even people who are not fashion experts, because the bar jacket has become such a signature look. It was definitely also adapted to the contemporary style. I found it a bit too literal. Something was off. I can't really tell you why. And then the second version, this red interpretation by Rhoda Mohammed, it was definitely, let's say, more contemporary. First of all, because of the color, and then also the shape and how they combined it to make it basically hers. Also here I was a bit like, yeah, there's so much praise in the fashion magazines and online. Maybe I'm an outlier. It was okay. It was nothing that I would remember for a very long time. Now it came back because I was writing this article and the video, but it was not something that stuck with me as a very innovative look. I can't really tell you why it didn't click with me. One reason maybe that I've seen enough of these reinterpretations recently, especially by Dior. I appreciate when a current creative director knows the archives. I think this is basically the homework that they have to do, because they still represent the founder of the house, and it can be interesting. But if you see it too often and also too literal, because there are so many other examples of this, maybe it's just getting boring for everyone. I always say it's like the sequel of a successful movie, or even worse, if they turn a cartoon into a live action movie. That's probably the better analogy. So I was a bit underwhelmed, but again, I would like to know what you think about this. Let me know in the comments below. And with this, I have also reached the end of my video about this iconic bar suit. I want to know from you, did you learn something? Did you know about this bar suit? Did you know the background and how it developed? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget two things to help me here. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and also hit that like button. I also have a lot of written content. If you prefer to read, you can find it on my website, thepinklookbook.com, and you can also check out my fashion label, Pelagona. And if you want to learn more about Christian Dior and his relationship to his sister Catherine, who has a very, very interesting story, I have another video for you. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you in the next one.